I met the other side of the coin after converting to Judaism and going through a situation that almost led to my end. I met the true Messiah, the real Jesus Christ. But before I tell you this story, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Continuing. I had always prided myself on my lucidity. In a world full of superstitions and unfounded beliefs, I, Professor Ezekiel Lima, was the voice of reason. With a PhD in religious studies from the University of São Paulo, specializing in Judaism, and the author of 3 books contesting the divinity of Jesus Christ, I was a respected figure in academic circles in São Paulo and a persona non grata in the city's evangelical churches. The irony was that I came from a traditionally Catholic family in the countryside of Minas Gerais. My mother, Dona Conceição, never accepted my conversion to Judaism at the age of 25. "It's just a phase, son," she would say. That phase lasted 2 decades. By the age of 45, I was respected in the Jewish community of Higienopolis as a fervent scholar of the Torah and an unrelenting critic of any approach to Christianity. It was in this context that I organized the trip to Salvador. The Shel Melech synagogue in Pelourinho, one of the oldest in Brazil, had discovered 18th century manuscripts in its basement during a renovation. As an expert, I was invited to analyze the texts. I accepted immediately. Salvador had always fascinated me. The peculiar mix of African religions, Catholicism, and Judaism formed a cultural melting pot that, despite my public denials, fueled my academic curiosity. The city greeted me with strange weather for July. The sky was heavy, dark, with distant lightning announcing an out-of-season tropical storm. The taxi driver who took me from the airport to the hotel in the historic center couldn't stop commenting on the weather. "Strange weather, doctor. The elders of Candomblé say it's an omen. When the sky looks like this, it's Zango shaking his axe." I smiled politely, but rolled my eyes internally. Superstitions. The world is full of them. The synagogue was just a few blocks from the hotel, a discreet building, preserved among colonial mansions, with a simple Star of David on its white facade. Despite the stifling heat, I felt a shiver as I crossed its gates. Rabbi Jacob Mizrahi, a man in his 70s with lively eyes and a well-groomed white beard, greeted me with a warm hug. "Professor Lima, so glad you made it. The manuscripts are waiting for you." The synagogue was practically empty at that time of the afternoon. Only an elderly woman prayed in a corner, swaying gently. Rabbi Mizrahi led me through a narrow staircase to a back room, where a table was already prepared with gloves, magnifying glasses, and the ancient documents carefully laid out. "These are correspondences between Portuguese Jewish merchants and members of the Salvador community," he explained. "We believe they may contain information about new Christians who secretly maintained Jewish practices during the Inquisition." I examined the first documents with the reverence I reserve for ancient texts. The paper was yellowed, fragile, but the letters in Hebrew and archaic Portuguese were still legible. As I worked, the storm finally arrived. Thunder shook the synagogue's windows, and rain fell like a deluge outside. After 2 hours of meticulous analysis, I found something intriguing. A letter mentioned a forbidden book hidden within the synagogue itself. "In the walls of the holy place, the truth awaits," the text in coded Hebrew said. "Rabbi Mizrahi, look at this," I called, excited by the discovery. The rabbi adjusted his glasses and read the passage. His expression changed. "Interesting," he murmured. "During the renovation, we found a cavity in the east wall behind the Aron HaKodesh. It was empty, but—" "Can we check?" I interrupted, barely containing my academic excitement. He hesitated for a moment. "Well, it's not the usual procedure, but considering your reputation, let's go." The main hall of the synagogue was now completely empty. The rain intensified outside, creating a constant percussion on the old roof. Rabbi Mizrahi led me to the sacred cabinet, where the Torah scrolls were kept. Moving aside the embroidered curtains, he revealed the stone wall behind it. "Here," he pointed to some stones that seemed slightly newer than the others. The masons found an empty space behind this section. I thought it was just a construction technique from that time. I approached to examine it more closely. The stones did seem different. I pressed one lightly, and to my surprise it gave a little. "There's something loose here," I commented. The rabbi seemed uncomfortable. "Professor, perhaps we should return to the manuscripts." I ignored his advice. My academic curiosity outweighed any hesitation. I pressed the stone harder, and it moved, revealing a small, dark compartment. Without thinking twice, I reached in and felt something, a small square object wrapped in cloth. I found something. As I pulled out the object, I realized it was a modest-sized book, wrapped in a cloth that must have once been red, now faded by time. Carefully, I unwrapped it. It was an ancient book bound in dark leather with no title on the cover, only a strange symbol, a six-pointed star intertwined with what looked like a stylized fish, a Christian symbol mixed with the Star of David. "What is this?" asked the rabbi, his voice now a tense whisper. "I don't know," I replied carefully. Opening the first page, the words hit me like a punch. The true story of Yeshua of Nazareth, the Messiah of Israel. The text was in a mix of ancient Hebrew and Aramaic. I felt my heart race. If authentic, this book could be a revolutionary discovery, an ancient Jewish text recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. Impossible. It had to be a forgery, perhaps planted by Christian missionaries at some point in the past. "Professor, I don't think we should." The rabbi's voice was interrupted by a deafening thunderclap that seemed to strike the synagogue directly. The lights flickered and went out. We were left in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the lightning coming through the windows. It was then that I felt the first pang in my chest, a sharp pain, as if someone had plunged a knife between my ribs. I staggered back, the book still in my hands. "Professor Lima, are you all right?" The rabbi's voice seemed distant, as if coming through a tunnel. The pain intensified, radiating to my left arm. I recognized the symptoms. My father had died of a heart attack at 50. Genetics. "Don't lie. Call." "An ambulance," I managed to say before falling to my knees. The book slipped from my hands and opened on the floor. A particularly strong lightning bolt illuminated the page, and the last thing I saw were Hebrew words that seemed to glow with their own light. "He who has eyes to see, let him see." Then darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer in the synagogue. I wasn't anywhere I could recognize. It was a gray space, a kind of dense fog stretching indefinitely in all directions. Was I floating or walking? Impossible to tell. There was no sense of weight or direction. Am I dead? The question escaped my lips, but I didn't hear my own voice. I only felt the words form and dissolve in the fog around me. The fog began to thicken in certain spots, forming incomplete figures and scenes like an unfinished impressionist painting. I recognized familiar elements: the bookshelf in my office in Sao Paulo, the synagogue bench where I used to sit, my mother's face, younger than I remembered. Ezekiel. A woman's voice reached me, soft, familiar. "Mom?" I called, turning in, circles trying to locate the source of the sound. "No, Ezekiel, it's me." The fog condensed in front of me, forming the outline of a woman. As the details became sharper, I felt my heart, if I still had one, freeze. It was Rachel, my ex-wife. The great love of my life, lost 15 years ago when my academic obsession destroyed our marriage. "Rachel, how... are you also... dead?" She smiled, that smile I knew so well, with the dimple in her right cheek. "No, Ezekiel. I'm very much still alive in Belo Horizonte. It's me, but it's not me. I'm the Rachel of your memory." She wore a simple white dress like the one she had worn at our first meeting, at a lecture on Jewish philosophy in college. Her black, curly hair framed the face I had tried to forget for over a decade. "I don't understand. Where am I? What is this place?" "This is the in-between, Ezekiel, the space between life and death. You had a heart attack in the synagogue. Right now, doctors are trying to revive your body. So, I'm really dying." The idea should have terrified me, but strangely, I felt only a calm resignation. "That depends," Rachel replied, extending her hand as if to guide me. "Come. There's something you need to see." I hesitated for a moment, then took her hand. It was solid and warm to the touch, contradicting her ethereal appearance. The landscape around us began to change. The fog partially dissipated, revealing a disturbing scene. We were in a distorted version of Jerusalem, or was it Salvador? The architectures blended confusingly. Synagogues with Baroque church towers, cobblestone streets ending in ancient stone walls. The sky above was a sickly purple with two pale moons watching the impossible city. What is this place? It's the world as you built it, Ezekiel. With your absolute certainties, your denials, your intellectual walls. As we walked, I noticed even more disturbing details. Torn pages from books floated in the air like dry leaves. I recognized passages from the Torah, the Talmud, even from my own books, mixed with fragments that seemed to come from the New Testament. Why are you showing me this, Rachel? What does it mean? She stopped in front of a building I immediately recognized, the Brazilian synagogue, where I had given my first lecture as a newly ordained rabbi. But the building was in ruins with the Star of David broken in half above the entrance. You built your life on denials, Ezekiel. You denied your Christian origins. You denied the possibility of other truths. You even denied love. Her words hit me like an accusation. I sought the truth. I dedicated my life to study, to understanding. You sought the truth you had already decided to find, she replied softly, and rejected everything that didn't fit your convictions. A figure appeared in the distance, walking toward us, a man of average height, dressed in simple clothes, linen pants and a white shirt. As he approached, I noticed he was about 33 years old, with a short beard and eyes of unsettling depth. I couldn't define their exact color, as they seemed to change every moment, from brown to blue to green. Who is he? I asked, feeling an inexplicable mix of attraction and fear. Rachel didn't answer, only smiled enigmatically. The man stopped a few meters from us. His face was both ordinary and extraordinary, Brazilian mixed features, as if he carried within him all the ethnicities of the country. "Shalom, Ezekiel," he said, his voice resonating in a way that seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but within me. "How do you know my name?" He smiled. "I know all my children by name." Something in the way he spoke sent a shiver through me. "Who are you?" Instead of answering directly, he pointed to the ruins of the synagogue. "Why do you think this place is destroyed, Professor?" The way he said Professor, not as a title but almost as a question, bothered me. "I don't know, this whole place is absurd. Probably just a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen in my brain as I die. It's easier to believe you're delirious than to consider that there's something beyond what you've always believed, isn't it?" The man didn't seem offended, just compassionate. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my irritation growing. Even on the brink of death, apparently, I couldn't escape theological debates. "I want nothing from you, Ezekiel. The question is, what do you want for yourself? To continue in a world built on denials, or to open yourself to possibilities you've always feared to explore?" He extended his hand. In his palm was a small golden key. "What is this?" "The key to the book you found. The key to understanding what has always been missing in your searches." I looked at Rachel as if seeking confirmation. She only nodded encouragingly. Hesitantly, I took the key. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. "What should I do with it?" The man smiled again. "Open what is closed, see what is hidden." As he spoke, the sky above us darkened even more. Strange thunder, which seemed more like words in an unknown language than natural sounds, reverberated among the distorted buildings. "We don't have much time," said the man, looking at the sky. "You need to decide, Ezekiel. Return to the world. You know, or discover the truth you've always avoided." "What truth? What are you talking about?" At that moment, I heard distant voices calling my name, urgent professional voices. "Losing him. Another dose of adrenaline. Prepare the defibrillator." "Those are the doctors," Rachel explained. "They're trying to bring you back." "I'm really dying," I murmured, the reality of the situation finally hitting me. "Everyone dies a little every day," the man said enigmatically. The question is whether we truly live before that. The doctor's voices grew louder. I felt a growing pressure in my chest, as if someone were pushing hard. "Decide, Ezekiel," the man insisted, his voice now mixing with the others. "The key. Here's in your hands." I looked at the small golden key, then at Rachel, who watched me with expectant eyes. The sky above pulsed like a dying heart, and the impossible city around us began to dissolve back into fog. I want to know," I heard myself say, the words escaping almost involuntarily. "I want to understand." The man smiled, his eyes shining like constellations. "Then you will understand." He approached and touched my forehead with his fingertips. A burst of white light engulfed everything. "He's back, we have a pulse," shouted a female voice, distant. I opened my eyes to the white ceiling of a hospital. Anxious faces watched me. Doctors, nurses, and Rabbi Mizrahi in the background, with a relieved expression. "Welcome back, Professor," said a young doctor. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but there was a tube in my throat. Only when it was removed could I articulate the words burning in my mind. "The book," I managed to whisper. "Where is the book?" Rabbi Mizrahi approached, looking uncomfortable. "It's safe, Professor. Don't worry about it now." I grabbed his arm with a strength I didn't know I had in my weakened state. I need to see it again." "After you recover," he promised, gently releasing my hand. The doctor checked my vitals. "You're very lucky, Professor Lima. Your heart stopped for almost 4 minutes. Any longer, and there would have been irreversible brain damage." 4 minutes, an eternity in the in-between. I closed my eyes, exhausted, and when I opened them, again the room was darker. I must have slept for a few hours. A nurse was adjusting the IV by the bed. "What time is it?" I asked, my voice still hoarse. "Almost midnight," she replied with a gentle smile. "You should rest more." But sleep had abandoned me. The images from my experience, hallucination, vision, or whatever it was, remained vivid in my mind. The man with the mysterious eyes, Rachel. The impossible city, the golden key. Instinctively, my hand went to my chest, where I had felt the heart attack pain. Under the thin hospital gown, I felt something small and metallic. Carefully, so as not to alert the nurse who was now checking the monitors, I slipped my hand inside the gown. My fingers touched a cold, familiar object, the golden key. It couldn't be. It was just a dream, a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen in my brain. It couldn't be real. But there it was, solid and undeniable between my fingers. "Everything all right, Professor?" asked the nurse, noticing my agitation. "Yes," I replied automatically, "just a bit uncomfortable." She nodded understandingly. "I'll bring something to help you sleep." As she left, I contemplated the key in my hand. It was identical to the one from my dream, vision, near-death experience. I hid the key under the pillow when the nurse returned with a pill. I swallowed it obediently, but I knew I wouldn't sleep anytime soon, even with medication. My mind buzzed with questions. If the key was real, what else was? The man with the color-changing eyes, the message about a truth I had always avoided, and the most disturbing question of all, what if he really was who I suspected he was? Have you ever had an experience that completely challenged everything you believed? How would you react if you discovered that something you denied your entire life could be true? Write it in the comments. Tomorrow I'll continue this unbelievable story, and I guarantee it will get even more surprising. If you're enjoying it, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. 3 days had passed since my heart attack in the synagogue. The doctors called my recovery miraculous, a word I had always avoided in my academic vocabulary. I preferred terms like inexplicable or statistically unlikely. Now, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, dressed and ready to be discharged, I twirled the small golden key between my fingers, contemplating how much of my skepticism remained intact. Rabbi Mizrahi had visited me daily. On the first visit, he brought the book found in the wall cavity, carefully wrapped in blue velvet. "The doctors said not to agitate you with work," he commented, hesitant, "but I figured you wouldn't rest until you saw it again." He was right. The book had haunted me in the brief moments of sleep I managed to have. Thank you, Rabbi. I took the package with a reverence that surprised even myself. You looked at the contents? He shook his head. Just the first few pages. My Aramaic isn't as good as yours, Professor. He paused before adding, but enough to worry me. Worry? I repeated, already unwrapping the book. It's a non-orthodox text. His careful tone said more than his words. Considering your specialty in refuting certain messianic claims, I thought it might be providential that you found it. Providential. Another word I avoided. I opened the book carefully. The first pages contained what seemed to be an introduction in ancient Hebrew, followed by a main text in Aramaic. I flipped through slowly, my eyes catching phrases and paragraphs that made my heart race. Fortunately, not enough to trigger another heart attack. I'll let you rest, said the rabbi, moving toward the door. Before leaving, he turned with an enigmatic expression. Professor Lima, in the Torah, it is written that Moses saw the burning bush and turned aside to observe that great spectacle. Sometimes, God sets fire to our lives to divert our attention. With those cryptic words, he left, leaving me alone, with the ancient book and my tumultuous thoughts. Now 3 days later, I had read the manuscript from beginning to end twice. It was an account by a first-century Alexandrian Jew named Benjamin ben Yosef, who claimed to have been a secret disciple of Yeshua of Nazareth. The text combined elements of Jewish oral traditions with teachings that echoed the Christian Gospels, but with details and nuances I had never read in any Christian or Jewish source. The most disturbing part was how the author described Yeshua, not as an incarnate God from later Christian theology, nor as the false Messiah from the traditional Jewish perspective, but as something in between. An authentic human being who somehow was also more than that. The transport is ready, Professor Lima, announced a nurse, interrupting my thoughts. Can I help you with your bag? I quickly hid the key in my pocket. No need, thank you. I can carry it. The hospital had arranged a car to take me back to the hotel. Although the doctors recommended I return to São Paulo immediately, I insisted on staying a few more days in Salvador. There was a mystery to solve, and I felt the answers were in this city. In the back seat of the car, I watched the streets of Salvador pass by the window. The city seemed different now, as if every intersection, every Baroque church, every hidden torero could hold some revelation. The sky remained heavy and dark, the storm of the past days giving only a momentary respite. Still strange weather. Huh, Doc, commented the driver, a middle-aged man with a thick Bahian accent. Never seen July like this in Salvador. Truly unusual, I agreed distractedly. You're from out of town, right? Here to see the churches? Most tourists come for that. Not exactly. I came to study ancient texts at the Pelourinho synagogue. Through the rearview mirror, I saw his eyebrows rise with interest. Ah, so you're Jewish. Interesting. Salvador has a lot of Jewish history that few people know about. Yes, I am. You seem to know something about it. He smiled. My grandfather said our family were new Christians. You know what that is? Jews forced to convert to Christianity during the Inquisition, I replied automatically, my academic mind taking over. That's right. He kept some strange customs, never ate pork, lit candles on Fridays without knowing why. He gave a brief laugh. We follow traditions without understanding, don't we? But something in the blood knows. His words touched a raw nerve. How many times had I criticized precisely this attitude, following traditions without rational questioning? And yet, here I was, with an impossible key in my pocket and an ancient book in my bag, following... What? An intuition? A calling? We're... Here, Doc, he announced, stopping in front of my hotel. I paid the fare and got out with my small suitcase. The hotel was a renovated colonial mansion, with Portuguese tiles on the facade and a small inner courtyard with a fountain. The kind of place I would normally appreciate for its historical value, but which now seemed just a temporary stop on a greater journey. In my room, I closed the curtains and spread my materials on the bed, the ancient book, my notebook, notepads, and the mysterious golden key. I placed the key on the book, hoping for some indication of where it should be inserted, but there was no visible lock on its leather binding. Frustrated, I turned on my notebook and opened the file where I had started translating excerpts from the manuscript. I worked for hours, ignoring hunger and fatigue. The text was fascinating and disturbing. Benjamin ben Yosef described miracles he had witnessed, private conversations with the Master, and an explanation of Yeshua's purpose that challenged both Christian theology and Jewish rejection. He did not come to create a new religion, I translated from a particularly intriguing passage, but to complete the circle that began with Abraham. Not to abolish the law, but to reveal its beating heart. I sat back, rubbing my tired eyes. Academically, this was explosive. If authentic, a big if, this text could rewrite the understanding of the origins of Christianity and its relationship with Judaism. But my mind couldn't stay on the safe ground of academic analysis. It kept returning to the experience in the in-between, to the man with the shifting eyes, to Rachel. A particularly loud thunderclap startled me. The storm had returned. Lightning illuminated the room through the gaps in the curtains. I got up to close them better, and passing by the window saw something that froze me in place. Across the street in front of a colonial church was a solitary figure looking directly at my window. Even at a distance and in the darkness, I immediately recognized who it was. The man from my vision, with the same simple linen clothes, completely dry despite the torrential rain falling on him. I instinctively stepped back, my heart racing. When I gathered the courage to look again, he was gone. Was I imagining things? Were the medications causing hallucinations? Or was it that? A metallic sound made me turn. The golden key, which I had left on the book, was now on the floor. As I picked it up, I noticed the book was open to a different page, a page I didn't remember seeing before. The text on this page was different. It wasn't in Aramaic or Hebrew, but in Portuguese, in modern Portuguese, and the handwriting, it was my own. When you are ready to see, beyond the masks you've created, come find me where the sacred divides between the old and the new. I read and reread the message, incredulous. It was impossible. The book was centuries old. How could it contain a message in modern Portuguese, written in my own handwriting? I closed the book forcefully and backed away to the wall, as if the object were a snake about to strike. The reality I knew, the ordered, academic, skeptical reality, was crumbling around me. I stayed like that for several minutes, leaning against the wall, breathing heavily, trying to regain control. The doctor had warned me to avoid stress. I needed to calm down before I had another heart attack. It's just exhaustion, I murmured to myself. I'm seeing things, mixing reality with dreams. But the golden key in my hand was solid and cold. Real. Have you ever wondered what you would do if something you didn't believe in suddenly proved to be real? How would you react if you had to question the fundamental foundations of your worldview? Comment below. I drank a glass of water and took my heart medication. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow I would think more clearly. However, sleep didn't come easily, and when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of streets turning into labyrinths, of Rachel calling me from afar, and of the man with the shifting eyes watching me patiently, waiting for me to find him, where the sacred divides between the old and the new. I woke up with the first rays of sunlight piercing through the curtains. I had slept longer than I expected. My phone showed several messages. Colleagues from the university asking about my health, Rabbi Mizrahi checking if I had arrived safely at the hotel, and a message from the department asking for an estimate of when I would return. I ignored them all temporarily. The message from the book still echoed in my mind. Where the sacred divides between the old and the new. Salvador was a city of religious contrasts. Colonial Catholic churches next to candomblé terreiros, discreet synagogues among craft shops with images of oryxars. Where did the old and the new divide? As I showered, an idea came to me. Pelourinho, the historic center of Salvador, was where the old and the modern coexisted in constant tension. And there was a specific place, the Church of the Holy Sacrament of the Steps, built in the 18th century, which stood exactly on the border between the upper and lower parts of the city. More importantly, It was just a few meters from the shell. Melech Synagogue, where everything had begun. I dressed quickly, packed the book and the key in my backpack, and headed out into the street. The sky was surprisingly clear after days of storms, as if a decision had been made in the celestial realm. The streets of the historic center were full of tourists and locals, a normal day in Salvador. I walked with purpose, ignoring the colorful shops and the vendors of Bonfim ribbons. My destination was clear. The Church of the Steps, as it was locally known, stood imposingly at the top of a stone staircase. Its white facade gleamed in the sun, and its dark wooden doors were open, inviting. I stopped for a moment, watching the comings and goings of worshippers and tourists. To the left, a few blocks away, I could see the roof of the synagogue where I had found the book, where the sacred divides between the old and the new. This was the place, an exact point where colonial Catholicism and discreet Judaism coexisted in Salvador, separated only by a few blocks of stone. I climbed the stairs slowly, still conscious of my recent heart condition. At the top, I entered the semicircular church with its marble floor and gilded altars. It was almost empty at that hour of the morning, just an elderly woman praying on a bench and a staff member cleaning the altar. I sat on a bench in the back, feeling out of place and vaguely sacrilegious. What was I doing here? Following clues from a mysterious book and a post-heart attack hallucination? "It took you longer than I expected," said a familiar voice beside me. I turned quickly. The man with the shifting eyes was sitting next to me, as if he had been there all along. He wore the same simple white clothes, starkly contrasting with the Baroque opulence around us. "You're real," I whispered, part question, part statement. He smiled. "As real as you are, Professor. Perhaps more." I looked around nervously, but the elderly woman and the staff member seemed not to notice our presence. "They can't see us now," he explained, as if reading my thoughts. "We're in a pause. Like in the synagogue, when I died." "You didn't die, Ezekiel. You just crossed the veil for a few moments." I swallowed hard. "Who are you, really?" His eyes, now a deep brown, watched me with a mix of amusement and compassion. "You already know the answer to that question. That's why you're so scared." He was right. Some part of me, the part I had tried to silence with years of academic rationalism, knew exactly who or what he was, but I couldn't admit it, not even to myself. "The book," I deflected, opening my backpack. "There's a message in it that wasn't there before, in modern Portuguese, in my own handwriting." "Yes," he nodded. "The book shows you what you need to see." "How is that possible? Is it some kind of trick?" He laughed softly. "You've spent your entire life studying sacred texts, Ezekiel. Did you ever consider that they could be more than just words on paper? That they could contain living truths, revealing themselves differently to different readers in different times?" His question caught me off guard. It was true. I had treated sacred texts as archaeological artifacts, dissecting them academically, never allowing them to touch me more deeply. "Did you bring the key?" he asked. I nodded, taking it from my pocket. It shone golden under the light streaming through the stained glass. "What does it open?" "It's not the kind of key that opens physical doors," he explained, extending his hand. "It's a key to perception." I hesitated before handing it over. "What happens if I give this to you?" "You'll see beyond the veil, permanently." "And if I refuse? If I keep the key and return to my normal life?" His eyes, now blue like the sky, studied me with sadness. "You can try. But you've already seen too much, Ezekiel. Already felt too much. You can return to your books and articles, but you'll never be the same. The question will remain unanswered, consuming you from within." I knew he was right. From the moment I woke up in the hospital with the impossible key, something fundamental had changed. I couldn't simply go back to being Professor Ezekiel Lima, the relentless skeptic and defender of pure reason. "What's the purpose of all this?" I asked, trying to buy time. "Why me? I'm the least likely person to believe in whatever this is." "Exactly because of that," he replied with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the most skeptical are the ones who most need to see. And the ones who, once convinced, become the most powerful witnesses. A shiver ran down my spine. Witness to what? Instead of answering, he stood up. Come with me. I followed him to the altar, passing the staff member who seemed frozen in time, the cleaning cloth suspended in midair. In the center of the altar was a large golden cross with the figure of the crucified Christ. What do you see? He asked, pointing to the cross. A common religious representation, I replied automatically. A symbol of faith for billions of people. No, what do you really see, Ezekiel? The man, not the symbol. I looked more closely at the carved figure. It was a traditional representation of the suffering Christ. Thin body, crown of thorns, expression of transcendent pain. I see an image that has inspired art and devotion for centuries, I elaborated, but also one that has been used to justify wars, persecutions, including against my own people. Ah, Ezekiel, he sighed, always analyzing, always distancing, never allowing the truth to touch your heart. He turned to me, his eyes now a deep green. Give me the key. Something in the way he asked, not an order but almost a plea, made me extend my hand. I placed the small golden key in his open palm. Close your eyes, he instructed softly. I obeyed, feeling simultaneously foolish and terrified. I felt his fingers touch my forehead, exactly as in the in-between after my heart attack. An intense heat radiated from the point of contact, spreading like liquid fire through my body. Behind my closed eyelids, explosions of light danced like stars being born and dying. Open your eyes, Ezekiel. His voice sounded different now, deeper, broader, as if coming from everywhere at once. When I obeyed, the world had changed. The church around us was simultaneously there and not there. I could see through the solid walls, observing the city of Salvador in all directions. But it wasn't just the Salvador of the present. I could see layers of time overlapping, like transparent pages of a book. I saw slave ships arriving at the port. I saw Tupinamba Indians watching the first colonizers. I saw churches being built by slaves. I saw secret ceremonies of forcibly converted Jews. I saw modern protests for social justice, all happening simultaneously, like a visual symphony of history and humanity. And at the center of it all, growing and shrinking like a cosmic heart, a luminous presence interconnected all the scenes, all the eras, all the human beings in their moments of joy and despair, cruelty and compassion. What is this? I stammered, stunned by the vastness of what I was witnessing. It's reality as it truly is, replied the man, his voice now indistinguishable from the pulsating light permeating everything. Without the divisions you've created, without the walls between faith and faith, time and time, being and being. It's too much, I murmured, feeling small and insignificant before that vastness of experience and meaning. That's why you only see fragments. The totality would be unbearable for limited human consciousness. Slowly the vision began to contract, like a universe shrinking back to the size of a seed. The church reappeared around us, solid and normal again, or almost. Now I could see faint lines of light connecting everything, the pews, the images, the still frozen staff member, the praying woman myself, and the man beside me. He glowed, not like a lamp or a mystical aura from religious portraits. It was a light that seemed to come from within, as if every cell of his body were a tiny star. You, I began, unable to complete the sentence. He smiled. He didn't confirm or deny what I was beginning to understand. Instead, he extended his hand and returned the golden key to me. This is yours now, use it wisely. What should I do? I asked, feeling simultaneously enlightened and completely lost. You're a professor, Ezekiel. Teach what you've learned. Not as dogma, not as absolute certainty, but as possibility. No one will believe me, I argued. I'll be fired from the university, ridiculed by colleagues, maybe even expelled from the Jewish community. Probably, he agreed with a slight shrug that seemed strangely human for a being I now knew wasn't entirely human. It was the same. For all who saw beyond the veil. Is that what you want? For me to ruin my life? "What I want," he replied with infinite gentleness, "is for you to truly live for the first time." Suddenly, sound returned to the church. The staff member continued, his movement wiping the altar. The elderly woman coughed discreetly. We were back in the normal flow of time. The man, no, he was more than that, began to walk toward the church door. "Wait!" I called, louder than I intended. The staff member looked in my direction, confused. I lowered my voice. "I still have so many questions." He stopped at the door, the morning light of Salvador creating a halo around him. "The answers are within you now, Ezekiel, and in the book. Read it again with eyes that can see." Then he stepped out into the blinding Bahian daylight, and when I reached the door, he had disappeared into the bustling streets of Pelourinho. I returned to the church's interior, feeling transformed. The world seemed different now, more alive, more connected. I could feel the history embedded in the walls, the hopes and prayers of centuries hanging in the air like golden dust. I sat on a pew, trying to process everything that had happened. The golden key weighed in my hand, an impossible object from a reality I hadn't known existed until a few days ago. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Rabbi Mizrahi. "Professor Lima, I hope you're recovering well. There have been interesting developments regarding the book we found. Can we meet today?" I looked at the message for a long moment. My academic life, my identity as a skeptic and rationalist, my position in the Jewish community, everything was about to change drastically. Or perhaps it had already changed the moment the key appeared under my pillow in the hospital. "There's no going back, is there?" I murmured to myself. As if in response, a gentle breeze swept through the church, lifting golden dust into the light of the stained glass. For a moment, the particles seemed to form words in the air before dispersing. "Only forward." I put away my phone and the key and stepped out into the sunlit streets of Salvador, a city I now recognized as much more than a historical tourist destination. It was a nexus of times, beliefs, and overlapping realities. A place where the veil between worlds was thin enough to be crossed. My journey was just beginning. And have you ever felt that there is more to reality than our eyes can see? Have you ever had an inexplicable experience that challenged your rational understanding of the world? Share it in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final chapter. Things are going to get even more intense and revealing. I walked through the streets of Pelourinho, the golden key in my pocket and the ancient book in my backpack. Salvador seemed different now, more alive, as if the layers of history beneath my feet reverberated in every stone. At Largo de Pelourinho, I met an elderly woman dressed in traditional Bahian attire. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked bluntly. "It's in your eyes." She introduced herself as Mãe d'Alva, from a nearby Candomblé terreiro. I was struck by her perceptiveness. "Everyone who sees is chosen," she said, handing me a Bonfim ribbon. "You'll need protection while you learn to navigate between worlds." Later, as I studied the book again, I discovered something astonishing. Pages that hadn't existed before, written in modern Portuguese in my own handwriting. One passage read, "When you are ready to see beyond the masks you've created, come, find me where the sacred divides between the old and the new." Accompanying the text was an illustration showing Salvador from above, with lines connecting 3 points: the synagogue, the Church of the Steps, and the Terreiro de Jesus, a perfect triangle. At Terreiro de Jesus, as I touched the colonial cross, I had flashing visions of centuries of history, different peoples, beliefs, and eras. In all of them, the same man with the shifting eyes was present, observing or discreetly participating. At the synagogue, I found Rabbi Mizrahi worried. I told him about my experiences, expecting skepticism, but he showed me the diary of a 19th century rabbi who had had identical experiences after finding the same book. Our conversation was interrupted by an intruder, Professor Avraham Goldstein from Tel Aviv University, who identified himself as a member of the Shomrei Ha'emet, the Guardians of Truth. "The manuscript you discovered is known as Sefer HaShamayim, the Book of the Heavens," he explained. a dangerous text that has driven many scholars to madness or apostasy. When I refused to hand over the book, Goldstein drew a gun. "The Shomrei Haemet take their duty very seriously," he declared. "Hand over the book and the key." At that moment, the man with the shifting eyes appeared in the small church where we had taken refuge from the rain. "Shalom, Avraham," he said. "It's been a long time." Goldstein paled. "No, it's not possible. You're not real." "You also saw beyond the veil once," I realized. "Had the same experiences." "He founded the modern Shomrei Haemet," the mysterious man confirmed, "an organization dedicated to suppressing any evidence that might challenge the boundaries between religions." Mang Dalva and Rabbi Mizrahi arrived, and in the momentary confusion, the man with the shifting eyes managed to approach Goldstein. His touch seemed to break decades of denial in the Israeli academic, who collapsed in tears. "Why won't you leave me alone?" Goldstein sobbed. "Because I never give up on my children," the man replied. "Not even those who think they've abandoned me." When the storm subsided, Goldstein seemed transformed. He promised to inform the Shomrei Haemet that the book had been destroyed. The man with the shifting eyes prepared to leave. "Who are you really?" I finally asked, though I already knew deep down. "You've always known," he replied. "Everyone knows. It's just the veil that prevents recognition. And now that I've seen beyond the veil, what should I do?" "Live the truth you've discovered, not as dogma, not as a new religion, but as a bridge. The world doesn't need more walls, Ezekiel. It needs bridges." "No one will believe me." "Some will," Mindalva interjected. "Those who are ready to listen." Before leaving, the man looked at me with eyes now green like ancient forests. "I am always present, Ezekiel. In moments of compassion, in acts of love, in the bridges people build between each other. And now that you've learned to see, you'll recognize me in all those places." He stepped out into the blinding light of Salvador, and when I reached the door, he was gone. 3 months later, back in São Paulo, my life had completely changed. The book remained with me, revealing new words daily. The golden key now hung around my neck as a pendant, a constant reminder. My academic reputation was divided. Some colleagues mocked my new interest in interfaith connections, while others curiously drew closer. A small, diverse group of scholars and seekers began meeting weekly in my apartment. Goldstein kept his word. There was no further contact from the Shomrei Haemet. I heard he had retired and was now living on a kibbutz in the desert, writing his memoirs. The man with the shifting eyes never appeared in the same way again, but I often felt his presence in moments of unexpected beauty, in acts of kindness between strangers, in meaningful coincidences that seemed to stitch the fabric of reality. Surprisingly, Rachel, my ex-wife, reached out after hearing about my transformation. "You seem different, Ezekiel," she observed when we met. "More present. Let's just say I've learned to see things from a new perspective. I'd like to hear that story someday." "It's a long story," I warned, "and quite unbelievable." She smiled with the dimple in her cheek that I had never forgotten. "I have time, and I've always liked unbelievable stories." As we talked, I observed São Paulo around us, the chaotic city where skyscrapers and favelas, temples and churches, synagogues and terreiros coexisted, all housing the same fundamental light I could now see. The veil had been lifted, and there was no going back. All that remained was to move forward, building bridges where there had once been walls. And you, can you see beyond the veils that divide our world? Have you ever had an experience that completely transformed your view of reality? Share it in the comments. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive more content like this. The journey continues, and there is much more to discover together.